I think is really quite valuable. The first video in that series is already up on Patreon, and it's a look through all my tools, paints, and everything I've got in my painting setup. And what game will I be painting next? Well, stay tuned and find out. Let's have a look through the games I've painted so far. Let's start off with Relic, which is a bit of a nothing game. If you're familiar with a game called Talisman, this is just Talisman, but set in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. And if you're not familiar with either of those games, it's just a game where you roll some dice and stuff happens. You go on a bit of an adventure, you draw cards, you roll some dice, and you may or may not win. There's not a lot of skill involved. But one of the things that sets Relic apart is these magnificent busts that came with the game. They're much larger in scale than your normal 32mm miniature, which meant I could have a lot of fun painting expressive faces. And there's two characters I want to showcase here. The first is the Commissar, because look at that dour, grumpy face. And the second is the Sister of Battle, and I'm really happy with how these two in particular turned out. Next up, we have one of the biggest painting projects I've ever done, and that is Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition. I don't actually have a shot of the full game set up and painted because the board is just so damn big that by the time you pull the wide shot out, you can't really tell how well painted it is. But there are 7 distinct factions in this game, and each of them is painted in line with their World War II color schemes. I even did some flags and other details on the ships, and spent entirely too much time making little bases out of washers, little bits of wire, and modeling clay. Really, really simple flying stands, but they are functional and they do seem to work on the table. And all the planes seem to have stayed in. One thing to note about this game is you'll take like the Japanese forces, they have orange lines along the bottom of the ships and the units, and that's because first and foremost, I paint for it to be a functional game. Therefore, having each faction be readily recognizable just as a scan across the table is still important to the game. Yeah, there were no orange-sided ships in the Imperial Navy, but it's important to keep that game element in when you're painting a board game. Otherwise, everything can end up just a muddy blur of different colors. Probably my favorite figures in this whole series are the Italian Air Force. I really like the little doppling effect I got on the wings of the bombers, and little details like hand painting the insignias. Next up, we have Anachrony, one of my all-time favorite games, and the very first game I attempted to